So now that we have our helper methods created, we want to be able to use them. So the next step is to actually create our handler for our listing of the schools. All right, so let's create our handler. But first, let me add that handler. So I'm going to go to my routes file, and we have right underneath health check, I will actually create an entry for our get handler. Okay, so router the handler func and http that method get. Of course, our URL pattern is v1/schools. All right, and the handler that should be called will be named app that list schools handler. Okay, of course we have not yet created this handler, but that's what we will do next. So list schools handler. All right, so let's close that, and let's close our helpers, and let's actually create our handler. So I'm going to go to school. Okay, and I'm going to come all the way down here, okay, and I will create my list schools handler. Okay, so the list schools handler allows the client to see a listing of schools based on a set of criteria. All right, great. So that's our definition. Let's actually create our handler. So of course, it's a method on type application. And like I mentioned previously, it's going to be called list schools handler. And of course, we know we need a response writer. And we need a request pointer to our request object. Okay, so let's create, all right, similar to what we did in previous handlers. We're going to create an input struct, okay, to hold our query parameters. All right, so create a variable of type input of type struct, and it will contain the following values or fields. We have name, type string, we have level, also of type string, then we will have mode, which is a string slice. Then of course we need to remember page, which is an int, page size, which is also an int, and of course sort, which will be a string. All right, so this struct will contain whatever we get from the query parameters. So once we have that, let's create a validator. Okay, easy enough, right? So I'm going to create a new validator. Great. And after we have our validator, we'll proceed to get the parameters. All right. So let's get the URL values map. All right. Again, that's easy to do. We're going to name it QS, and we simply have to say r dot URL dot query. All right. And if you remember, parses and returns the corresponding values. All right. Great. So once we have our map, right? So if you notice, QS is a URL at values, which is actually a map. Okay, so let's now use the helper methods, right, to extract the values. Okay, so let's start off with the string values. So input that name will be assigned to whatever app that read string returns. So we need to pass in the map, of course. We need to pass in the key we're looking for. We're looking for name. And we need to pass in the default value, which we'll keep as the empty string. Okay. Likewise, we need to get the level. Okay. And again, we will use read string. We pass in the map, we pass in level, and we'll pass in the empty string again. All right, so the next thing we need to do is to read our mode. And so we'll simply use the read CSV helper method. And of course, we need to pass in the map. We also need to pass in the key, which we know is mode. And what else do we need to pass in? We need to pass in a default value, but as a slice. And so we're going to use the empty string slice, okay, which we do like that. Okay. Now let's deal with the page information. So get the page information using the read int helper method. So input that page will be assigned whatever read int okay. It's not recognizing read int. Let's go back just to make sure I have that correct. Helpers. Oh, right. So that's my problem right there. Can you see it? I forgot to specify that it's a method, an application. All right. So let me quickly fix that. All right. Great. So let's try again. App.read int, and we need to specify the map. We need to specify the key, which is page, and we also need to specify the default value, which is an int. So if no page parameter or value is given, we're going to have the default be 1, and then we need to provide a validator, which we know is v. Okay, so let's move on to the page size. So how many records should be returned? Well, let's do that. I'm going to pass in QS. We're going to pass in page underscore size, and the default is 20 records. Okay, and of course v. Okay, so with that out of the way, the last thing we need to look at is to deal with the sort. So get the sort information. Okay, so input that sort will be assigned to whatever we get when we get the sort value. So app that read string, since sort is a string value, we're going to pass in QS. We're going to pass in the key, which we know is sort, and we need to pass in a default value. And so if sort is not provided, we want to sort by ID. Okay, that's what we want to sort by. Okay, so once we have all these values, we will need to check to see if there was any validation error. Okay, so let's check for validation errors. Right? If we have validation errors, then we will need to exit our handler. There's no use displaying anything if we have validation errors. So again, this is nothing new. So if v.valid not, so meaning false, it means that there is something in the map, right? And so we're going to have app that failed validation response. So we're going to pass in W, we're going to pass in R, we're going to pass in v dot errors. Okay. Let's try it again. Let's W R v dot errors. Okay, so once we send our response, we will return from the handler that we're in, since we don't want to continue. Otherwise, everything works out, there were no errors, and so we will simply dump the result. Right? So our results dump. Right? So we're just going to display it. fmt dot f printf. Okay, and let's have w, of course, as our IO writer, and we're going to have modulus plus v, since we want the field along with its value, 1 per line, and input. Alright, again, this should not be new to you, and that's it. So all we're going to do is, all we're doing here is to see if we can actually get the parameters that the client has provided. And if there are no parameters, we'll fall back on the default ones. Okay, so this is our handler. We already have specified it in our routes.go file. Okay, it's a post method. Okay, so we have get and we have post. Post is where we create a new school, but this get is where we list the schools. Okay, so let's test this out. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start a server. Start our server. So go run. All right, our server is up and running. Let me create a new terminal or a new window, and I'm gonna simply say curl, and I'm gonna use double quotes just to ensure that everything works. When we pass in multiple parameters, query parameters, we tend to put double quotes in curl to make sure everything gets recognized. So 4000 /v1 /schools. Let me put my first parameter. So question mark. Question mark says parameters are coming up. And I'm going to have name, and we don't need quotes. I'm going to say Apple. Let's put a plus for a space, 3. And let's say level is let's say high school. So high school, so space. And let's say the mode is online, comma, face to face. And let's say that page starts at 1. Okay, so 1 page, and number of records to be shown. That's page size, let's say 7. And let's say we want to sort by name. Okay, let's say descending. Okay, so let me close this off. All right, and let me press enter. And so notice what I get back. Name has this value, level has this value, mode, right? After we split it up by the comma, using the split function, we get this slice. We get the page, we get the page size, and we get the sort. If I decide to do this again, but this time I do not provide any of the parameters, then I should expect that the defaults will be used. So localhost 4000 v1 schools. I should still get back something. Alright, and so name is the empty string, level is the empty string, mode is the empty slice, page 1 and page size is 20. Okay, and sort is by ID. Alright, so it works. So good so far. And so in the next coming lessons, we want to be able to add further to this so that we can actually start doing the actual returning of the data that are based on the query parameters that the client has passed in. So again, this is sort of a long unit, and that's why I'm breaking it up into as many videos as possible so that you can grasp each of the core ideas. So I'll see you in the next lesson.